The alien armada surrounded Earth. Humanity smiled, the stars above Earth flickered and changed on a cold December morning. And 3,000 alien warships tore through the fabric of space itself. Emerging from fold space in perfect formation around the small blue planet that humans called Home, Fleet Commander Kethra Voss stood on the bridge of her flagship, the Eternal Conquest, watching the planet below with eyes that had seen 900 worlds fall to her empire. And she felt nothing but cold satisfaction at the sight of another primitive species about to learn its place in the universe. The Valorian Dominion had ruled the known galaxies for 12,000 years. And in all that time, they had never failed to conquer a world they set their sights upon, never failed to crush resistance, never failed to add another species to their collection of slaves and servants. Kethra's four hearts beat with the steady rhythm of absolute confidence as she studied the sensor readings that her officers presented to her. And everything she saw confirmed what her scouts had reported decades ago. The humans were primitive beyond belief, barely capable of reaching their own moon, still fighting among themselves over resources and territory, still divided into hundreds of nations that could not agree on anything, still burning fossil fuels like cave dwellers playing with fire. Open a channel to the planet, Kethra commanded, her voice carrying the weight of an empire that spanned 5 galaxies and 900 conquered worlds. Her communications officer obeyed instantly, and within seconds, Kethra's image was being broadcast to every screen, every radio, every device on the planet below. She spoke the words she had spoken to so many worlds before, the standard subjugation ultimatum that had brought countless species to their knees. People of Earth, she said, I am Fleet Commander Kethra Voss of the Valorian Dominion, and your world now belongs to us. You have 2 choices before you today. Surrender completely and serve the Dominion as workers and soldiers, or resist and face total extinction. There is no third option, there is no negotiation, there is only submission or death. You have 24 hours to respond. She ended the transmission and waited for what always came next. The panic, the chaos, the desperate pleas for mercy, the pathetic attempts to fight back with primitive weapons, the eventual surrender of broken leaders who realized they had no choice. But the response that came from Earth was not what she expected. It came within minutes, not hours, transmitted on all frequencies in a unified signal that seemed to come from every nation on the planet at once. 3 words, spoken in a calm voice that carried no fear, no desperation, no panic. We've been waiting for you. Kethra felt her secondary heart skip a beat as she turned to her officers with confusion written across her gray face before she could speak. Another transmission arrived, this time a request for visual communication from something called the United Nations. And Kethra accepted it with growing unease. Face that appeared on her view screen belonged to a human female with gray hair and dark eyes. And the expression on that face was not terror or despair or desperate hope. The human was smiling. Fleet Commander Voss, the woman said, My name is Elena Vasquez, and I am the Secretary General of the United Nations, the governing body that speaks for all of humanity. We received your ultimatum, and we would like to request 72 hours to prepare our formal response. Kethra studied the human's face, searching for signs of the fear that should have been there, the trembling that should have affected her voice, the sweat that should have covered her skin. She found nothing but calm confidence and something else, something that looked almost like amusement, almost like pity. You wish for more time to prepare your surrender? Kethra asked. We wish for more time to prepare our response, Vasquez replied. And that smile never wavered, never flickered, never showed any sign of the terror that Kethra had seen on the faces of 900 world leaders before her. Something cold moved through Kethra's blood, something she had not felt in centuries of conquest and victory. Took her a moment to recognize it as fear. She dismissed the feeling immediately. because it was absurd, because it was impossible, because there was nothing a primitive species like humanity could do against the might of the Valorian Dominion. Very well, Kethra said. You have 72 hours. Use them to say goodbye to your world as you know it. She ended the transmission and turned to her officers, who were watching her with expressions that mirrored her own confusion. Commander, her tactical officer said, shall we begin scanning for military installations and defensive capabilities? Do it, Kethra replied, and report anything unusual immediately. The scans began, and the reports came back exactly as expected: primitive nuclear weapons, chemical rockets, satellites that could barely maintain orbit, ground-based militaries equipped with projectile weapons and simple explosives. Nothing that could threaten even a single Valorian warship, let alone a fleet of 3,000. And yet Kethra could not shake the feeling that something was wrong, that something was hiding beneath the surface of that peaceful blue world. That the smile on Elena Vasquez's face meant something she could not understand. She walked to the viewport of her bridge and stared down at Earth, watching the clouds swirl over the continents below, watching the lights of human cities flicker on the dark side of the planet. 900 worlds had fallen to her fleet, and every single one of them had shown fear when the Dominion arrived. But the humans were not afraid. The humans were smiling, and as Kethra Voss stood on the bridge of her flagship, surrounded by the most powerful military force in the known universe, she felt a chill run down her spine that she could not explain. Below her, on the surface of Earth, Secretary General Elena Vasquez ended the transmission and turned to face the room full of generals and scientists and world leaders who had gathered to witness this moment. They took the bait, she said. 72 hours is more than enough time. General Marcus Chun, commander of Earth's hidden military forces, stepped forward with a tablet in his hands and a fierce smile on his weathered face. 50 years of waiting, he said. 50 years of hiding. 50 years of letting them think we were primitive. It all comes down to this. Vasquez nodded and looked around the room at the faces of men and women who had dedicated their lives to this single moment. Begin final preparations, she said, and may whatever gods exist have mercy on them, because humanity will not. The room erupted into controlled chaos as orders were given and plans were set into motion. And somewhere above them, 3,000 alien warships waited in orbit, completely unaware that they had just made the worst mistake in the 12,000-year history of their empire. They had given humanity exactly what it needed: time to prepare the end of an empire. The alien armada surrounded Earth. Humanity smiled. The story of how humanity prepared for this moment began 50 years ago, in the frozen wilderness of Siberia, where a Soviet patrol stumbled upon something that would change the course of human history forever. The Valorian scout ship had crashed in the snow 3 days earlier, its hull torn open by damage that the pilot could not repair, its engines dead, its communication systems destroyed beyond hope of sending a distress signal when the Soviet soldiers found the ship. They also found the pilot, a gray-skinned creature with 4 arms and eyes that reflected light like mirrors, dying slowly in the frozen wreckage of its vessel. The soldiers did not know what to do, so they called their commanders, who called their commanders, who eventually called Moscow, and within hours, the highest levels of the Soviet government knew that humanity was not alone in the universe, but the dying alien had something to say before it passed from this world, in exchange for a quick and merciful death. The pilot told the humans everything about the Valorian Dominion, about their 12,000 years of conquest, about the 900 worlds they had crushed beneath their boots, and about their interest in Earth. They will come, the pilot said, its voice weak and fading. Maybe not in 10 years, maybe not in 50, but they will come. And when they do, your world will fall like all the others. The Dominion has never failed to conquer a world they desired, and they will not fail with yours. The Soviet leaders listened to every word, recorded every detail. And then they did something that surprised even themselves. They shared the information with their greatest enemy, the Cold War had divided the world into two camps that seemed ready to destroy each other at any moment. But the revelation of alien life changed everything in secret meetings that the public would never know about. American and Soviet leaders sat down together in hidden rooms and looked at each other with new eyes, because they finally understood that their conflict was meaningless in the face of what was coming. The aliens were real. They were powerful beyond imagination, and they were coming to enslave or destroy all of humanity in that moment. The leaders of Earth made a choice that would shape the next 50 years of human history. They would prepare. They would hide their preparations behind the mask of their ongoing conflict, letting the alien scouts who watched Earth see only a primitive species tearing itself apart. They would pour their resources into secret projects, hidden facilities, and technologies that the rest of the world would never know existed. And they would wait for the day when Dominion finally arrived. The Cold War continued on the surface, with threats and posturing and the constant fear of nuclear annihilation. But beneath that surface, humanity was working together for the first time in its history. The space race became a cover story, a way to explain the rockets and satellites that were really being used to build something far greater than a trip to the moon bases, were constructed on the dark side of the moon, hidden from Earth and from any alien observers, filled with weapons and ships and soldiers who would never see their home planet until the day of battle. Arrived underground cities spread beneath the surface of every continent, connected by tunnels that stretched for thousands of miles, housing millions of people who lived their entire lives in secret, working on technologies that would have seemed like magic to the world above. Scientists from every nation worked side by side, sharing knowledge and ideas without the barriers of language or politics, driven by the knowledge that failure meant the end of everything they loved. They took apart the crashed Valorian scout ship piece by piece, learning its secrets, understanding its technology, and then improving upon it in ways the Dominion had never imagined. The Valorians had used fold space technology for thousands of years, but they had never thought to make it smaller, faster, more efficient. Human engineers looked at the alien engines and saw a dozen ways to make them better. The Valorians had powerful energy weapons, but they had never combined them with human targeting systems, human artificial intelligence, human creativity. Within a decade, human weapons could hit targets the Valorians would have considered impossible. Generation after generation worked on the project, passing their knowledge to their children, who passed it to their children, who passed it to their children. Scientists died never seeing the fruits of their labor, but they died knowing that their work would save humanity. Soldiers trained for wars they hoped would never come, mastering combat techniques and strategies that existed nowhere else in the universe, because humans had spent thousands of years perfecting the art of killing each other. And all the while, the world above continued as if nothing had changed. People went to work and raised families and argued about politics and watched television, completely unaware that beneath their feet, an army was preparing for the greatest battle in human history. General Marcus Chun was born into this secret world, raised by parents who had dedicated their lives to the project, trained from childhood to be the commander who would lead humanity's forces when the day finally arrived. He had never seen the surface of Earth with his own eyes until he was 30 years old. And when he finally emerged from the underground city where he had spent his entire life, he stood in an open field and looked up at the stars with tears streaming down his face. Those stars were why he existed, why his parents had sacrificed everything, why generations of humans had worked in secret while the world above remained ignorant. And now, 50 years after that Soviet patrol had found a dying alien in the Siberian snow, The day had finally come. General Chun stood in the command center of Earth's hidden military forces, surrounded by screens that showed the Valorian fleet in orbit above. And he felt no fear at all. He felt only the fierce joy of a hunter who had finally cornered his prey. "All stations report ready," his aide said. Reading from a tablet that glowed with green lights, Chun nodded and looked at the image of Fleet Commander Kethra Voss, who stood on the bridge of her flagship with the arrogant confidence of someone who had never known defeat. "She thinks she's the predator," Chun said, "and we're the prey. She has no idea that we've been preparing for this moment since before she was born." He turned to his officers, men and women who had trained their entire lives for this battle, and he saw the same fierce joy reflected in their eyes. 50 years of waiting," he said. 50 years of hiding. Today, we stop hiding. Today, we show the universe what humanity really is on the screens around him. The countdown continued toward zero, toward the moment when Earth would reveal its true face to the galaxy, and somewhere in orbit, 3,000 Valorian warships waited in perfect formation, completely unaware that they were not the hunters. They were the prey. They had always been the prey. And humanity was about to teach them what that meant. The alien armada surrounded Earth. Humanity smiled. The 72 hours passed slowly for Fleet Commander Kethra Voss, who spent the time pacing the bridge of her flagship and reviewing sensor data that told her nothing she did not already know. The humans were primitive. Their world was defenseless, and their request for additional time was nothing more than a desperate attempt to delay the inevitable. When the deadline arrived, Kethra stood before her command console with her 4 hands clasped behind her back and prepared to give the order that would begin the conquest of Earth. "Target their largest cities first," she commanded. "Standard bombardment pattern. Show them what happens to species that make the Dominion wait." Her weapons officer reached for the firing controls, ready to rain destruction upon the world below. And then the moon split open. Kethra watched in frozen horror as Earth's moon, that dead gray rock that her sensors had dismissed as a natural satellite, cracked apart to reveal something massive hiding within its hollow core. The Artemis array came online with a flash of light so bright that it overloaded every sensor on the western flank of the Valorian fleet. And then 300 warships simply ceased to exist. There was no explosion, no debris, no warning. Just 300 vessels converted into expanding clouds of superheated plasma in less than a single second. "What?" Kethra began to say, but her words were drowned out by alarms screaming across every system on her bridge. Proximity alerts, weapons locks, fold space signatures, thousands of contacts appearing on sensors that had shown nothing moments before. Human ships erupted from hiding places throughout the solar system, from behind asteroids, from within the rings of Saturn, from beneath camouflage plating on satellites that had seemed dead and dormant, from fold space itself as they jumped into battle positions around the Valorian fleet. The humans had mastered fold space technology. They had hidden an entire armada within their own solar system. They had been watching and waiting while the Dominion fleet sat in perfect formation, like targets in a shooting gallery. "Impossible!" Kethra's tactical officer shouted, his screens filled with red indicators and threat warnings. "They're primitive." Our scouts confirmed they could barely reach their own moon, but the evidence was right there in front of them. Undeniable and terrifying. Thousands of human warships surrounding the Valorian fleet, weapons charged and ready, moving with a coordination and speed that should have been impossible for any species, let alone one that had seemed so primitive. The first volley of human weapons fire tore through the Valorian formation like a knife through paper, and Kethra watched in disbelief as ships that had survived 100 battles crumbled and burned in seconds. "Return fire!" she screamed. "All ships, return fire!" The Valorian fleet responded with the discipline of an empire that had conquered 900 worlds, unleashing weapons that had broken countless civilizations, targeting the human ships with systems that had never failed before. But the human ships were not where the targeting systems said they should be. They moved with impossible speed, dodging and weaving through the Valorian fire, their smaller size and faster engines allowing them to dance around the larger Dominion vessels like wolves circling wounded prey, and they kept firing, never stopping, never slowing, pouring destruction into the Valorian fleet with weapons that operated on principles Kethra had never seen before. Her view screen flickered, and suddenly Secretary General Elena Vasquez was there again, that same gentle smile on her face, watching the destruction of the Dominion fleet with eyes that showed no mercy. "Commander Voss," Vasquez said, "I hope you're beginning to understand your mistake." "How?" Kethra demanded, her voice cracking with a fear she had not felt in centuries. "How is this possible? You were primitive. Your technology was centuries behind ours." "We wanted you to think that," Vasquez replied. "For 50 years, we've known you were coming. For 50 years, we've been preparing. Every primitive rocket you saw, every satellite you scanned, every weapon you dismissed, all of it was a mask. A lie designed to make you underestimate us." She leaned forward, and her smile grew wider. "Your empire conquers through intimidation. You arrive with overwhelming force, and species surrender because they believe they have no choice. But we knew you were coming, Commander. We had 50 years to prepare our response." On the screens around them, the battle raged with terrifying intensity. Valorian ships burning and breaking apart, human vessels swarming through the debris with predatory grace. "You assumed we were primitive because we hadn't left our solar system," Vasquez continued. "You never considered that we might have chosen to stay, that we were building something, that every day we spent on our little blue world was a day we used to prepare for this moment." Kethra watched another 100 ships disappear from her tactical display, their icons winking out like candles in a hurricane. "The Valorian Dominion has spent 12,000 years conquering species that had never known war," Vasquez said. "You've never faced an enemy like us. You've never faced a species that has spent its entire existence fighting itself." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of human history. "We have fought wars that lasted 100 years, Commander. We have killed each other by the millions over land and resources and ideas. We have perfected the art of destruction in ways your empire cannot imagine, because we have been practicing on the most dangerous species we ever encountered." Her smile faded, replaced by something harder and more dangerous: ourselves. The transmission ended, and Kethra stood alone on her bridge, watching the destruction of everything she had believed about the universe. The Valorian Dominion had never lost a battle in 12,000 years. They had never faced an enemy who refused to surrender, who fought with creative desperation, who treated death not as something to be feared, but as a price worth paying for victory. They had never faced humanity as the battle raged around her, as her fleet burned and crumbled and died. Kethra Voss finally understood the smile she had seen on Elena Vasquez's face during that first transmission. It was not amusement, and it was not pity. It was the smile of a predator who had finally stopped pretending to be preyed. It was the smile of a species that had been waiting 50 years for this moment. It was the smile of humanity, and it was the last thing the Valorian Dominion would ever see. The alien armada surrounded Earth. Humanity smiled. The battle for Earth raged for 6 days and 6 nights. And the stars themselves seemed to burn with the fury of the conflict that consumed the solar system. General Marcus Chung stood on the bridge of the UNSS Defiance, humanity's flagship, coordinating a war effort that spanned from the orbit of Mercury to the frozen edges of the asteroid belt. And he had never felt more alive. The Valorians were not easy prey. and Chun respected them for that. They had conquered 900 worlds through discipline and power. And even now, with their fleet burning around them, they fought with the determination of warriors who had never known defeat. They adapted to the Artemis Array's firing patterns within hours, repositioning their ships to minimize casualties, using their larger vessels as shields to protect their smaller attack craft. They regrouped their formations, creating defensive clusters that supported each other with overlapping fields of fire. They fought back with every weapon they had, and human ships died alongside Valorian ships in the chaos of battle. But humanity had something the Dominion had never encountered before: the creativity of a species that had spent its entire existence at war with itself. When the Valorians adapted to the Artemis Array, a 17-year-old girl from Seoul named Kinji-1 uploaded a virus into the Dominion's communication network that had scrambled their coordination for 3 critical. Horzi-1 had won a global cybersecurity competition at age 12 and had spent the next 5 years working in humanity's secret underground facilities, preparing for this exact moment when the Valorians deployed their feared Decimator-class dreadnoughts, massive ships designed to destroy entire fleets. Single-handedly, human pilots flew directly into the giant vessels' engine ports in attacks that should have been suicidal, but the pilots ejected at the last second, their automated retrieval drones snatching them from the void of space and bringing them home to fight again. And when those pilots landed on their carriers, there were volunteers lined up around the block, waiting for their chance to do the same thing. Watched his officers make decisions in seconds that would have taken Valorian commanders hours of deliberation. And he saw enlisted soldiers propose tactics that contradicted every established doctrine. And when a lieutenant from Brazil named Santos figured out how to use the debris from destroyed Valorian ships as improvised missiles, accelerating the wreckage with tractor beams and hurling it into enemy formations, a sergeant from Nigeria named Okonkwo discovered that Valorian shields could be overloaded by rapid low-power bursts instead of single high-power shots, a weakness that the Dominion had never thought to address because no enemy had ever survived long enough to find it. An engineer from Japan named Tanaka rewired the power systems on 12 damaged human ships, allowing them to channel all their energy into a single devastating weapon burst that crippled 3 Valorian command vessels in one coordinated attack. Every human in the fleet was thinking, adapting, innovating, finding new ways to kill and survive. And when the Valorians had never faced anything like it on the 4th day, Fleet Commander Kethra Voss ordered what remained of her fleet to retreat, to fold space and escape this nightmare system and return to Dominion territory with news of humanity's impossible strength. Their ships engaged their fold space drives. Nothing happened. Kethra stared at her console in disbelief as her officers reported that fold space was not responding, that something was blocking their ability to escape, that they were trapped in the system with no way out. Impossible, she said, but the word had lost its meaning over the past 4 days, because everything about this species was impossible on the surface of Earth. In a command center buried miles underground, General Chun smiled as he received reports that the fold space inhibitors were working exactly as designed. Humanity had planted them throughout the solar system decades ago, hidden in asteroids and moons and the rings of Saturn, waiting for the day when the Dominion fleet would try to run. There would be no escape for the Valorians. There would be no retreat. They would fight until they won or died. And humanity was absolutely certain which outcome was more likely on the 5th day. The Valorian fleet made its final stand near Jupiter, gathering its remaining ships into a defensive formation that bristled with weapons and shields. They fought with everything they had, unleashing destruction that would have shattered any other enemy, killing human ships by the hundreds, refusing to surrender even as their numbers dwindled and their hope faded. But humanity pressed forward at losses that would have broken any Valorian commander at 50% casualties. At 60%, at 70%, human pilots died with smiles on their faces, knowing that their sacrifice meant victory for their species. Human soldiers launched boarding actions against Valorian ships, fighting hand-to-hand in corridors designed for aliens, dying by the thousands to capture vessels that would give humanity new advantages. Human engineers worked through exhaustion and injury to keep damaged ships fighting, refusing to stop until their hearts gave out or victory was achieved on the sixth day. Chun opened a channel to all remaining Valorian ships. "This is General Marcus Chen of the United Nations Space Command," he said, his voice carrying across the void to every surviving Valorian vessel. "Your fleet is destroyed. Your commanders are dead or captured. Your fold space drives are useless. You cannot escape, and you cannot win." He paused, looking at the sensor displays that showed fewer than 400 Valorian ships remaining from a fleet of 3,000. "Surrender now," Chung continued, "and we will show you something your dominion has forgotten exists." He thought of all the species the Valorians had enslaved, all the worlds they had destroyed, all the civilizations they had crushed beneath their boots, and he thought of what humanity could have done in return, the vengeance they could have taken, the destruction they could have unleashed, the empire they could have built on the ashes of the Dominion. "Mercy," Chun said. "Surrender, and we will show you mercy." The channel went silent, and Chun waited one by one. The remaining Valorian ships powered down their weapons and dropped their shields one by one. They transmitted surrender codes and waited for human vessels to take them into custody one by one. The greatest military force the galaxy had ever known admitted defeat to a species they had dismissed as primitive and on the bridge of the eternal conquest. Fleet Commander Kethra Voss sat in her command chair and stared at the image of Earth on her view screen, that small blue world that had just destroyed her fleet and her certainty in everything she had believed about the universe. She had led the Valorian Dominion to its first defeat in 12,000 years, and she had been beaten by a species that had offered mercy when they could have offered only death. The alien Armada surrounded Earth. Humanity Smile Fleet Commander Kethra Voss stood in chains before the United Nations General Assembly, surrounded by the leaders of a species she had come to conquer, and she felt smaller than she had ever felt in her 400 years of life. The Great Hall was filled with humans from every nation on Earth, men and women of every color and creed and culture, united for the first time in their history by the war they had just won. They watched her with eyes that held anger and grief and curiosity, but not the fear she had expected, never the fear she had spent her whole career inspiring and conquered peoples of her fleet of 3,000 warships. Fewer than 400 remained, all captured, all now in human hands. The Valorian Dominion had suffered its first defeat in 12,000 years. And Kethra was the commander who had led them to that defeat. She expected death. It was what the Dominion would have given any commander who failed so completely, what they would have given any enemy who resisted so fiercely. She expected torture, or public execution, or slow starvation in a prison cell, because these were the fates her people had inflicted on countless others. Throughout their history of conquest, she did not expect what came next. Secretary General Elena Vasquez stood at the podium, looking down at Kethra with that same gentle expression she had worn throughout the war. And she began to speak. "Commander Voss," Vasquez said, "you came to our world with 3,000 ships and the intention to enslave or destroy our entire species. You underestimated us because our technology seemed primitive, because we had not spread beyond our own solar system, because we did not fit your definition of a threat." She paused, and the entire hall fell silent. "Your fleet is destroyed. Your soldiers are our prisoners. We now possess your technology, your star charts, and the coordinates to every world in the Valorian Dominion. In a decade, perhaps less, we could do to you what you have done to 900 civilizations." Kithra closed her eyes and waited for the sentence of death, for the declaration of war that would send human ships to Valorian space, for the revenge that her people had earned through 12,000 years of cruelty. But that is not who we choose to be. Vasquez said. Kethra opened her eyes and stared at the human leader in confusion. Our species has spent its entire history learning the same lesson over and over again. Vasquez continued, that conquest breeds resentment, that cruelty breeds hatred, that the cycle of violence and revenge only leads to more violence and more revenge until there is nothing left but ashes and grief. She stepped away from the podium and walked toward Kethra, stopping just a few feet away from the chain commander. We have fought wars that lasted generations. We have committed atrocities against each other that would make your dominion proud. We have burned our own cities and slaughtered our own children in the name of power and territory and ideas. She reached out and, to Kethra's shock, gently took one of her 4 hands, and we have learned, again and again, that the hardest victory is not defeating your enemy. It is choosing to build something better when the fighting is done. Kethra felt tears forming in her mirror-like eyes, tears she had not shed since childhood. Tears she had thought herself incapable of producing. "What do you want from us?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Vasquez smiled. And it was not the smile of a predator or a conqueror. It was the smile of someone offering hope. "We want peace," Vasquez said. "We want the Dominion to release every species you have enslaved, to dismantle your war machine, to join a new galactic council where every civilization has an equal voice." She squeezed Kethra's hand, and in exchange, we will share everything we have, our knowledge, our medicine, our art, our music, our stories. We will help you become something better than conquerors. We will help you become partners. Kethra wept, and she did not understand why she had expected death. And instead she was being offered life. She had expected revenge. And instead she was being offered friendship. She had expected humanity to be exactly like the Valorian Dominion, to take power when they had the chance and use it to dominate others. But they were not like the Dominion at all. Why? Kethra asked, the word broken by sobs she could not control. You could rule everything. You could take revenge for what we intended to do. Why would you show mercy to an enemy that showed none to anyone else? Vasquez knelt down so that her eyes were level with Kethra's. Because mercy is not weakness, she said. Because forgiveness is not surrender. Because the universe has enough conquerors and enough empires built on fear and pain. She stood and turned to face the assembly, her voice rising to fill the hall. Today, humanity chooses a different path. Today, we declare that our victory over the Valorian Dominion is not the beginning of a new empire, but the end of an old way of thinking. She raised her hand toward the stars visible through the great windows of the assembly hall. We will go to those stars, not as conquerors, but as partners. We will meet other species not with weapons, but with open hands. We will build a galaxy where every civilization can thrive, where every voice matters, where the strong protect the weak instead of exploiting them. She turned back to Kethra, and it begins today, with you. It begins with choosing peace over revenge, hope over hatred, tomorrow over yesterday. Kethra looked at the human who had defeated her fleet and destroyed her certainties. And she saw something she had never seen in all her centuries of conquest. Saw someone who believed that the universe could be better than it was. She saw someone who was willing to fight for that belief. Not with weapons and warships, but with mercy and patience and trust, and for the first time in her life. Kethra Voss believed that 250 years later, the Galactic Cooperative spanned 12,000 worlds, and species that had spent millennia at war sat together in council chambers, trading art and ideas instead of weapons and threats in classrooms across the galaxy. Young beings of every species learned the story of the small blue world that had prepared for annihilation and chosen, in its moment of absolute triumph, to offer peace instead. They learned that humanity's greatest weapon had never been the Artemis Array or the Hidden Fleet or the fold space technology they had improved humanity's greatest weapon was their stubborn, irrational, beautiful belief that tomorrow could always be better than today. And as the stars burned on in their eternal dance, the universe slowly began to change. One act of mercy at a time, one choice for hope at a time, one smile at a time, the alien Armada had surrounded Earth. And humanity had smiled, not because they were ready for war, but because they knew that war was just the beginning. And the best part of their story was still waiting to be written.